After I was reborn, I avoided every chance to be with Adrian. When he said he was coming home for break, I told him I had to stay on campus to study. When he moved Scarlett and the boy into our place, I moved out alone. When he decided to stay at the academy, I boarded a train to the Mojave by myself. In my last life I slaved for him for decades, yet in my old age even my own son begged me to divorce him, just so the star-crossed lovers could be together after death. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. No one knew I had been reborn. Staring at the Caltech envelope on the desk, I still couldn't believe it. Lynn, are you sure you won't think it over? The Mojave is rough country, but Caltech, behind the desk, my old physics teacher, Professor Quinn, tried one last time. Seeing that familiar face again, I almost cried. In my previous life I'd loved physics, but most people thought a girl couldn't hack it. When everyone else said girls and equations don't mix, she alone insisted we could. In the end I'd let her down. Because after I married Adrian I got pregnant right away and gave up college. This time, I had been reborn before the wedding. The memories of that past life made my eyes sting, but I shook my head. No, Professor, I don't need to think. She opened her mouth to persuade me further, but I cut in firmly. I'm going. She hesitated. I heard your fiancé is staying here for college. If you go so far away, will he wait for you? At the mention of Adrian, the tall, straight figure of his youth flashed through my mind, only to be swallowed by a shadow of gloom. Remembering everything, I gave a mocking shake of my head. Then, casually, it's fine, Professor. These days everyone believes in free love. That childhood betrothal is just feudal dross, best discarded. She'd clearly heard the rumors. She stood and patted my shoulder. If that's how you feel, I'm relieved. Admiration sparkled in her eyes. Lynn, I'm waiting for the day you dazzle the world. I smiled. Professor, I think you've forgotten the meaning of Caltech's most famous statue. Without hesitation I switched my application to Caltech. Following the stream of students, I found my way back to the apartment I still shared with Adrian. According to memory, he wouldn't be here for the next few days. He was busy escorting Scarlett and her son home to visit family. I pushed open the door. The rooms were empty. I mocked myself even as I exhaled in relief. Otherwise I couldn't swear I wouldn't drag him down with me in mutual destruction. It took a long moment before the truth of my rebirth truly sank in. My fingers skimmed the smooth desktop, no scratches yet, no random doodles. In the corner sat only my review books and a jar of cold cream. Recalling how I'd died in that life, I smiled coldly. Since he'd loved Scarlett and her child so much, this time he could find his own womb to crawl into. Who could have guessed that in my last life I'd been literally angered to death by my own son? Adrian and Scarlett had hurt me, yes, but nothing compared to the betrayal of the boy I'd raised. I still remember trembling from head to toe when an old friend told me Andrew had married Scarlett's daughter behind my back. I'd rushed to confront him. Why, of all people, Scarlett's daughter? He knew what Scarlett and his father had done. He had once wept over Adrian's favoritism. How could he? I couldn't accept that the child I'd nurtured had been seduced by that mother and daughter pair. At first Andrew mumbled excuses. When pressed he shoved me away. What's wrong with Aunt Scarlett? At least she's better educated than you and knows how to live. Mom, can't you just let go? Dad has suffered his whole life because of you. If it weren't for you, he and Aunt Scarlett would be together already. You two look wrong together, every way you look at it. Why can't you just let him go? In that instant words failed me. I felt every drop of blood freeze in my veins. The son I had raised with my own hands was ashamed of me. The pain in my lower back, from years of labor, from slamming into table edges, was nothing beside the agony in my heart. That was the moment I learned what it meant to feel 10,000 arrows pierce you at once. Yes, Scarlett had been pampered by Adrian her whole life. Of course she knew more about living than I did. When I gave birth to Andrew, Adrian happened to be posted out of town, taking Scarlett and her daughter with him. By the time Andrew turned 3 and could start preschool, I planned to resume my studies, but the colonel fell ill. After I'd buried the colonel, Eleanor slipped and fell, paralysis claiming her. Once my own parents died, the Vance estate had taken me in. They'd been good to me. So I set everything aside again and returned to Riverdale with Andrew. And in the end, I stayed another 10 years. I slid to the floor, hand pressed to my heart, and reached toward the door Andrew had already slammed shut. The last thing I saw was my own withered hand, so gaunt and ancient it looked like a stranger's. Scarlett was 5 years older than me, yet at that age she still lacquered her slender nails scarlet, while life had ground me into a crone. I stared at that hand, unwilling to die, eyes wide with grievance. Perhaps my resentment was too loud, heaven gave me this second chance. I stretched out my hand again, this one still young, still pale, and laughed. Andrew thought I'd dragged my feet back then? Adrian climbed the ranks year after year while I raised his son and nursed Eleanor. There was no time for anything else. School, career, everything was postponed. What else could I do? But I'd forgotten the simplest rule: love yourself before you love anyone else. And I'd forgotten that sons grow up unable to imagine their mother's pain. I had been catastrophically wrong. Luckily, the clock has reset, everything is still possible. This time I refused to be led by hollow morality. By the time Adrian came home, I had already disposed of almost everything I owned. I packed my few remaining things and hid them, together with my Caltech acceptance letter, in the corner of the wardrobe. After sweeping the room clean, I started dinner. The food was just ready when Adrian walked in with Scarlett and her daughter. "Smells amazing," Scarlett, playing hostess, lifted the lid of the pot on the stove. I scooped up the smaller saucepan, stepped around her, and walked to the door. "Here, Rusty," I called, and dumped the entire pot of spare ribs into the dog's bowl right in front of her. Ignoring Scarlett's sudden flush, I pulled out a bowl of noodles for myself and began to eat. Thanks to my previous life, I knew exactly what day they would return. In that life Adrian had told me Scarlett was a comrade's widow, he was simply honoring a promise to look after them. I'd sensed something off but swallowed my doubts, infected by the whispered notion that I, betrothed since childhood, wasn't good enough for him. Handsome, ambitious, a cadet officer, while I was only the Milltown girl tied to him by an old family contract. Before the wedding I had seriously asked if he wanted to reconsider. He'd insisted there was nothing between him and Scarlett and told me not to fantasize. Now, slurping noodles, I sneered. I wondered how that dead teammate would feel, knowing Adrian had comforted his widow straight into bed. When Adrian came out of the bedroom, Scarlett and her daughter had already rearranged their faces. The girl stared at me with hungry eyes, tugging Adrian's sleeve. "Uncle Adrian, I'm starving," I kept eating. Adrian frowned. "Didn't you cook?" I glanced up. The young Adrian was still handsome, but the flutter I once felt was gone. "I cooked, for one. I didn't know you'd be here." He looked at my noodles, still frowning. I smelled bones stewing. "Postpartum meal for Rusty," I said evenly. His brows snapped tighter. Before he could speak, I took my empty bowl to the sink, rinsed it, and walked out. Through the door I heard Scarlett murmur, "A whole pot of ribs, your wife treats that dog better than people." I dried my hands and answered, "Rusty earns his keep, he knows how to be grateful." Ignoring her sour look, I went to my room, unscrewed the jar of cold cream, and coated my hands thickly. No reason for me to age faster than Scarlett. This life, nobody gets to turn me into a housemaid. Outside, I heard Adrian soothing Scarlett and the girl. He pushed my door open, brow creased. "Lynn, can you cook something else? The kid's hungry, and so am I." I gave a short laugh. "Kid hungry? She's got a mother. And I've got campus business. Feed yourself." I grabbed my jacket and left without looking back. I didn't care what they did, I really did have business. While sorting my things these past 2 days, I'd taken stock of my meager savings. I understood Andrew's choice in the previous life, plain and simple. Life with me came with fewer comforts. When he was small and needed care, he clung to me. But every time Adrian came home on leave, the boy turned dazzlingly affectionate toward his father. I'd been too busy to dwell on it. Anyone who's ever nursed a bedridden elder knows how days grind away. Between the Colonel and Eleanor, my youth had already been nearly consumed. I met Ning Fei at the coffee shop she'd chosen. Cash was tight, so I wanted tutoring work. Her cousin would take the college entrance exams next year, and she'd asked if I could coach him. He was one of the urban youths sent to work in the countryside, recently returned to the city. Watching the tall, handsome young man beside Ning Fei, I felt a flicker of familiarity, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't place where we might have met. After setting a tutoring time with Simon, I made another trip to the dime store. I still had to go back to the old mill town and break the childhood betrothal with Adrian, though freakoic. Love was already fashionable, this wasn't quite the later era yet. Besides, Adrian's and my match had been checked by an astrologer and sealed with a betrothal token. These past few years I had lived at the Vance estate, and the villagers had long counted me as one of them. I didn't want to leave trouble for the future. When I returned to the place I shared with Adrian, Scarlett and her son were already gone. Adrian frowned at the armfuls of packages I carried. "You're going back to the village?" he asked. I gave a soft wondering whether to come straight out with the breakup. But he spoke first. Good timing. Scarlett's dorm is being reassigned, and it's hard for her to move all her stuff with the kid. I wanted to ask if we could clear out your room for them for a while. I stared at him, wordless. He called it asking. In the last life I had said no, and he'd still brought them home, tossing my belongings everywhere. Even the ancestral jade pendant my parents had left me vanished. When I frantically demanded answers, he'd shielded the sobbing Scarlett. Who told you not to pack your things properly? I had put everything neatly in the closet, yet even my clothes were strewn across the floor. In that moment I'd actually wanted to back out of the marriage. But when I saw Colonel and Eleanor, I hadn't known how to open my mouth. They truly hoped Adrian and I would live happily ever after. I stayed silent, and Adrian kept talking until I heard him once again suggest we postpone the wedding. This time I agreed without hesitation. Fine. Now it was Adrian who hesitated. That's not what I meant. I only wanted to wait until my faculty appointment is settled before we file the marriage clearance form. I gave another flat then went to heat water for a foot soak. Adrian opened his mouth, followed me into the kitchen, and said, "How about we pick a date for the second half of the year? Or maybe National Day, by then I set the kettle on the bee. Anna and cut him off. We'll see." It had been the same in the last life, only then I'd still felt worried. This time I truly didn't care. In fact, I felt faintly pleased. I decided to keep the broken engagement a secret from him, at least until I left for the Mojave. I didn't want more complications. After washing up, I went to bed and slept soundly. Adrian watched the unnaturally calm woman, a nameless panic rising in his chest. At dawn I caught the first bus back to the village. Colonel and Eleanor were delighted to see me, but when I said I wanted to break the engagement, they fell into a rare silence. Colonel sat to one side, smoking a bowl of rough tobacco, his normally gentle face darkened with anger. "Girl, I know that punk Adrian's rotten. Wait here, old man's going to fetch him," and I reached out to stop him. Eleanor wiped her eyes, then tugged his arm. "Let it go, old man. Young people today aren't like us. Force them into marriage and we'll only hurt the girl." See, they always melted my heart. But I really didn't want to walk the old road again. So I dropped to my knees before them, tears streaming. "Dad, Mom, even without this marriage you're still the parents who gave me a second life, so please, give me your blessing." Colonel, stooped with age, called for the village party secretary and, in front of him, formally dissolved my engagement to Adrian. Afterward Eleanor held my hand. "Good child, I know you've been wronged." I shook my head. Maybe Adrian and I had simply been a mistake from the start. Yet looking at Colonel and Eleanor, something inside me quietly let go. After the annulment I didn't return to Adrian's place. That apartment had always been assigned by his work unit. Scarlett and her son were probably already moved in. I found a cheaper motel, conveniently close to Simon's house. I strung the recovered jade pendant on a cord and wore it around my neck, a constant reminder that everything was different now. In this life there would be no Adrian, and no Andrew. I would make a beautiful life for myself. How Adrian eventually learned of the broken engagement didn't interest me in the least. By the time he came rushing to the station, a month had passed and I was on the Mojave-bound train. Ignoring his futile, furious face outside the window, I waved to Simon on the platform and slowly rolled away. Communication in this era wasn't as instant as it would become. More than a month after I arrived at Caltech, I received a letter from Adrian. He demanded to know why I had broken the engagement, writing that if I would only reply he could immediately file our marriage clearance form. I didn't answer. Not long after, Adrian's second letter arrived. This time he threatened me in writing, telling me I'd regret it, that if I let this chance slip by, he and I would be finished forever. I snorted. That was exactly what I was hoping for. I ignored that letter too. Caltech's course load wasn't crushing, but it was no joke either. After the long rupture of my previous life, I spent every waking minute either in class, the library, or the lab. I made myself a sponge, soaking up knowledge until I felt fuller than I ever had. In my second year, Simon showed up. He was studying geological surveying, and during one field expedition he went missing. When the news reached campus, I suddenly remembered who he was. In my last life, after marrying Adrian, I had always regretted not going to Caltech. One day I walked past a newsstand, saw the word Caltech, and, as if possessed, bought the paper. Inside was a report on the geological survey team's accident, Simon's team. My heart pounded. I didn't hesitate. I tracked down the search party. I told them everything I knew and handed over the detector I'd just developed. I knew that patch of magnetic field was treacherous, ordinary instruments were useless. Afterward, every member of Simon's team thanked me. My detector had made the difference. The expedition that had lost several key people in my previous timeline came home safe this time, bringing back critically important data. That discovery gave our aerospace program a huge boost and broke the stranglehold the West had on us in that area. After graduation, I applied for grad school at Caltech and began working on classified national projects. I rarely went home. Adrian married Scarlett 6 months after I left. Word was someone reported their affair, Scarlett lost her chorus line job, and Adrian had no choice but to marry her. I didn't care what happened to them, Adrian kept writing, and I answered only the letter telling me the colonel was ill. When the colonel died, I took leave and went back. By then they had been married for years. Scarlett had even given Adrian a son, Andrew. The colonel and Eleanor had never liked her, so she convinced herself they only wanted a grandson and pulled out all the stops to produce Andrew. While I was home I ran into Scarlett's daughter by her first husband. Madeline, once as polished and pretty as her mother, was now unkempt and sullen. I glanced at Andrew in Scarlett's arms and understood. Ignoring Scarlett's veiled provocations, I helped the devastated Eleanor to her room. Afraid she'd suffer another stroke like the last timeline, I barely left her side. This time Adrian was inexplicably attentive. He had written that he would request a transfer and asked me to wait, then married Scarlett instead. For reasons I never learned, his career stalled this time around. I paid him no mind. I was busy planning Eleanor's future. I wanted her to come with me to the Mojave. I had spent years warding off disaster. The colonel hadn't lingered for years as before, but he still hadn't made it past this age. I was terrified the same would happen to Eleanor, so I asked her to leave with me. Over the years we had become mother and daughter in everything but name. From the next room came Adrian and Scarlett shouting. Eleanor patted my hand, exhausted. Mom knows you're here. But I can't go with you. I can't leave your dad. She added, don't worry, I can still get around, everyone here knows me. I don't want to end up a stranger in a strange place. When I started to protest, she patted my hand again and shooed me off. Go to bed. I had to let it go. The next morning Scarlett glared at me as if my very existence offended her. I couldn't be bothered. Knowing Eleanor's decision, I sought out the neighbor who looked in on her, asked her to watch Eleanor closely, and to call or write if anything happened. I would send money every month. After the colonel's funeral, I left again. I met Andrew again at Eleanor's funeral. Or, Andrew, as they call him now. I stood there with Simon's daughter, coldly surveying the man I'd once loved to death and the sister I now wanted dead. Never had the saying lovers become siblings felt so grim. Lily, who had never seen such a tangled family tree, stared slack-jawed at the two of them clawing at each other. Inside, Adrian and Scarlett were screaming themselves hoarse. The elegant lady of my previous life had turned into a shrieking harpy. I shepherded Lily through Eleanor's funeral with an icy face. Over the years I had heard plenty about Adrian and Scarlett. Turned out the person who reported their affair had been Scarlett herself. She had found the letter in which Adrian said he would come for me. Terrified he would leave, she staged the whole scandal. She got her wish, but that letter had become the thorn she could never remove. So she'd been terrified of losing Adrian, and sabotaged every promotion or transfer that came his way. That was why, after all these years, he was still stuck in place. Later, when she saw people who'd once lagged behind her climbing the ranks, she began to despise Adrian for getting nowhere, convinced he could never give her a better life. The friction between them never stopped. I had zero interest in their drama. Once Eleanor's funeral was finished, Lily and I packed tea. Oh, leave. We'd spent the last years building lives out in the Mojave. Simon's parents had already moved west with us. Andrew showed up the night before our departure. He was agitated, desperate to prove he was my son. The nonsense he spouted made Lily question his sanity. She even kindly suggested he see a psychiatrist. Furious, he lunged to shove my daughter. I coldly showed him the door. Still unwilling to give up, he shouted, Mom, believe me, I really should be your son. Only in this life I don't know how I ended up in Scarlett's womb. And that slut Madeline, she and her mother are both tramps. In the last life she also. I pushed Lily's curious head back inside, closed the door, and regarded him with ice in my eyes. Lily had no idea what he was rambling about, but I understood perfectly. I said coldly, didn't you adore Scarlett as your mom? Now your mother-in-law is your real mom, what's there to complain about? Andrew stared at me, eyes wide. Then his face drained of color. Of course I recognized Andrew as the same soul I'd once called Andrew. Even if this time he hadn't been born from my body, in the previous life I had raised him with my own hands. At first I refused to believe such a coincidence, but these days his calculated attentiveness, and his inexplicable jealousy toward Lily, turned suspicion into certainty. How did I finally prove it? I like the flavor of ginger in a dish but can't stand to bite into it, so I always pick the slivers out. Adrian had lived with me for years and never noticed. Andrew, back only a few days, did it flawlessly. When he eagerly set a plate of ginger-free food in front of me, I knew. Even though in this life I had never married Adrian, he had still found me. The small mole on the web between his left thumb and index finger was exactly where it had always been. I felt more amused than angry and decided to watch his little performance without exposing it. In the last life he'd been desperate to claim Scarlett as his mother. Now that she truly was, he was dissatisfied. Instead he pined for the mom he'd once rejected. I listened to his remorse and thought, father and son are cut from the same cloth, absolute egoists. Actually, I'd already understood in that first life. Did Adrian really love Scarlett so much? I doubted it. He simply couldn't bear to lose his free housekeeper, nor give up his bit of romance. Maybe I once did have feelings for him, but in the end all that remained was gratitude to Eleanor and the Colonel and concern for Andrew, and a lot of stubborn unwillingness to quit. But sunk costs shouldn't sway major decisions, and repaying kindness doesn't require sacrificing yourself. Part of the tragedy had been my own fault for clinging to a rut. Without saying goodbye to anyone, I slipped away with Lily. In this life I hadn't married Adrian as Eleanor and the Colonel had hoped, yet I had still looked after them. Neither lay bedridden for years. Under my quiet management they kept their dignity to the end. Andrew kept writing letter after letter. I never answered. The nature of my work made me impossible to find. I didn't care what became of him. By then the previous life felt as unreal as a pillow dream. The dream had ended. I was fully awake. I didn't hear news of Adrian and his son until several years later. Simon's parents, growing old, longed for home. During spring festival we traveled back. I learned Andrew's fate while tending Eleanor and the Colonel's graves from an old neighbor. In a rage he had struck and killed Madeline, this lifetime's stepsister, last lifetime's wife. After his conviction Adrian, perhaps from the shock, suffered a stroke and was left paralyzed. When I visited Adrian I found Scarlett slapping his face, gray hair flying, cursing that he had ruined her life. I blinked, set down the gift basket, turned, and walked away. Fine, from now on no one could say I hadn't given those tragic lovebirds exactly what they wanted. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please like and share with friends. We look forward to your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales. See you next time.